Top Ed Talk.
Good afternoon. I'm Lee Fleisher. I'm professor and chair at Penn, and I'm going to talk today about how culture and patient safety really influence quality as well as the psychological safety of your faculty, staff, the anesthetists, anesthesiologists, nurse anesthetists. So if you think about safety, we all think about the infamous Swiss cheese model, the idea that for an error to occur, there really must be multiple holes in the Swiss cheese, and only if they line up do you actually have an error where the order entry system isn't working and the wrong things are sent down the tube up to the ward, or you don't read the patient's name carefully, or they're similar patients. The problem is, and the way we've thought about it for years, is that if a bad outcome occurs, we investigate it. And we ask the question, was this a preventable error? And there's recently a book called Still Not Safe, written by some sociologists out of Hopkins and out of Oxford. And they asked the question, if we look at it in this manner, is it that we're looking for an explanation? And as Nietzsche says, any explanation is better than none. So as I've been thinking about it and looking into this question of how culture influences our approach to safety and quality, I want to make sure to start that we don't mistake a bad outcome for a bad decision. And if you think about it, and though on the bottom of this slide, I actually show what I believe is a retrospectoscope. And next to that retrospectoscope, for those who know pop culture, is Doctor Strange from Marvel Comics. And in the last Infinity Wars, yes, I'm going to go there, Doctor Strange holds up his finger and says, "This is the one." And he says it to Tony Stark. And what he's saying is, this is the one scenario out of 14 million possible futures in which there's no complication, in which we get it right, in which the world is saved and goes back to where it was to start. And there are 13,999,999 times where it doesn't go back to baseline. So my question is, if we went into one of those scenarios and had the bad outcome, but knew that it was possible to get to one because Dr. Strange knew it, was that an error? So as we start thinking about how we approach bad outcomes, we need to really start asking the question, the culture of quality and safety. Are we still in safety one, where a bad event occurs, we focus on the individuals and the errors? Or have we moved to safety two, asking what factors are maintaining safety? How do we get to good outcomes? What are the things working well? How do we understand human variation? So as I started down this journey for myself, and others have been there first, is I look at organization culture, and I believe that's really the key. And in this New England Journal Catalyst, it really talks about that idea of what is the culture of your organization. And I think as perioperative physicians, we're all familiar with the idea of checklists, and Peter Pronovost's quite famous study published in the New England Journal showing if we just use a checklist, that in fact we can reduce bloodstream infections, catheter-related. And it was really popularized in the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. But the question is that really what happened? Was it all about following the checklist? Because we know that in Ontario, for the WHO surgical checklist, not in all countries, that there were numerous times in which the checklist made no difference. And your own Mary Dixon Woods, as well as my Chuck Bosk from Penn, and others studied what happened in Michigan. And what they saw, it was not about the checklist, but it was the culture that surrounded the checklist. And the checklist was able to actually unify that culture. So, as we think about it, it's going to be really important to ask, what is the culture that we're trying to embed that we can actually do better and treat our patients better? And one of the areas I think is really important is psychological safety. And this was really developed conceptually and brought into medicine by Amy Edmondson, a Harvard Business School professor, married to a physician, married to the dean of Harvard Medical School currently. And she talks about psychological danger, that fear of admitting mistakes. We all know those scenarios. Blaming others, less likely to share different views, that in fact we don't learn. Now, what we want is a culture in which we really feel that safety. We're comfortable admitting that mistakes and exploring why it happened. Learning from failure, failing fast and learning fast. Everyone openly sharing ideas. And through that better innovation and decision making, something we started on, people do better. So I want to tell you about a study that we did on our own residents. And we asked them, do they debrief after a critical event? Do they learn? And what we found is a large percentage of them did not debrief. Now, some of it was they felt uncomfortable debriefing with the attending who happened to be on. Some of them felt there was no time. But what's really interesting in a paper that's come out in academic medicine is that what happens for these residents is their critical events are continuously reconstructed. What we mean is they think about the event and they try to construct something that in their own mind protects them from fully admitting fault. It's a protective measure. So at each stage, the residents negotiate issues of blame, culpability, and appropriateness of that emotional response. So Professor Edmondson really has this wonderful 2x2 chart. And when you look at it, you can see that there's accountability. And in a just culture, accountability is really important. You want high accountability. And if someone is actually doing things that are wrong and they know they're wrong, they're being cavalier, they're ignoring the norms, a just culture would actually sanction them in some way. It's really when they have high accountability versus low and high safety versus low, that in that low safety, low accountability, you have apathy. Nothing much is happening. In that high accountability, but low safety, you have anxiety. If they feel too complacent, they feel too safe, and they're not held accountable, that's comfort. But instead of saying that high safety and high accountability is bad, you actually say that's the learning zone. That's the time that you begin to say, we can get better. So I urge you to think about that and use that as your learning zone, and it reframes the reasons of admitted mistakes. Now, in that idea of culture, and given that we're still in the midst of a COVID pandemic, what became interesting about psychological safety is a series of articles came out in the States, this one in the Washington Post, by an anesthesia resident, where he said, essentially, you're basically right next to the nuclear reactor by intubating a COVID patient. In this article, talking about Connecticut and New York, young doctors struggle to treat coronavirus patients. They're horrified and scared. They're doing things that they're not sure they're capable of. In fact, articles in The Economist talk about the high risk that healthcare workers assume. So shortly after we started to see our first coronavirus patients, COVID-19 patients in Philadelphia, a collaborator of mine from the Wharton School at Penn, Sigal Barsed, wrote this article in HBR, and she sent it to me, 10 o'clock at night, The Contagion We Can Control. And she talked about the effect of negative emotional contagion, that if people start being scared, everyone gets scared, that it expands, and that what we really need to do is control that. So we performed a survey, and we actually got 240 clinicians in my department, residents, nurse anesthetists, physicians, attending physicians, and we asked them about their state anxiety. How anxious were they? And we looked at predictors, and what we found, and this is a relational mapping of the key factors, is if you actually have baseline trait anxiety, if you're nervous at baseline, huge predictor that you'll be nervous in this particular high-risk state. If you happen to be a CRNA, that increased it. Importantly, if we as leaders actually demonstrate value of what they're doing, that helps control it. But what's also interesting is the culture of anxiety. The emotional contagion is really critical. Making sure we had enough PPE was critical, and talking about it and being transparent about what we had. And finally, psychological safety, back to that Amy Edmondson concept. And what I saw is as my leaders, who were important as direct supervisors, got anxious, in fact, and this is an article that will be coming out shortly in the New England Journal Catalyst, or may already be out, that I needed to send them to an executive coaching team who were helping us, and that coaching team were fantastic at decreasing the anxiety, at catching that potential negative emotional contagion. And if we control that emotional contagion, we actually control burnout, that emotional exhaustion, that the anxiety was not fed by burnout, but increased burnout. And when we look at the issue of those who started out more controlled, less anxious, they had the greatest effect if there was a strong culture of anxiety. They caught it more than those who already started higher. So I'd like to end with some of the things that we did, that we learned from. The trait anxiety is a lot about promoting physical and mental health, exercising, therapy, meditation, connecting with friends and family. That culture acknowledging clinician anxiety, role modeling, calmness, providing supervisors access to coaches, vector consulting in our case, offering information about negative emotional contagion, addressing the PPE in a very transparent manner, because at times we were right at the border. We had to reuse PPE, creating forums for psychological safety, and finally, make sure we always value people's work. So I'd like to end with something that I recently had the privilege of writing with Nancy Foster, who's at the American Hospital Association, and Don Berwick, who many of you may know is the founder of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, IHI, and was the director of CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And we wrote a call to arms about this, and we really said these three pillars: to develop far beyond current levels for people and organizations, to deliver care, to discover and put to use best examples, to learn of care design and ensure improvement, to nurture the development of new models better aligned with the triple aim, which really developed by he and his colleagues at IHI. And most importantly, to better equip the entire healthcare workforce and its managers, executives, improvement of process of care and measurement of these processes as part of the self-definition and daily activities of all our healthcare professionals. Because what I think is really important is within this context, we have to create the culture of learning, the culture of having a safe space, the culture of wanting to do better, and learning those conditions in which we do better. Thank you very much.
Top Med Talk. Thanks for downloading Top Med Talk. Don't forget to subscribe via your podcatcher. Don't forget to check us out on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And also, don't forget, Top Med Talk is the broadcasting arm of EBPOM, Evidence-Based Perioperative Medicine. We'd love you to find out more about that. If you check out ebpom.org, you can find low prices on some of the conferences we're organising around the world. Many of them are virtual and don't even involve you leaving your own home. Check out ebpom.org now.